Well, happy Thursday, everybody. Thank you for taking the opportunity for us to be able to gather together here online and do a devotional from chapter 7, or as I like to say, episode 7 from the book of Esther. Here we are, 7th chapter, and in chapter 6, if Haman thought that he was having a bad day, boy, is he surely about to be corrected. His day is going to get even worse. He'd already seen this Jewish man, Mordecai, who sits at the gate and refuses to bow down to him. He's already seen this guy be elevated to a position and given this promotion and given all these great honors by the king. And not only was he given these great honors and promoted, but Haman himself had to go and bestow all of these blessings upon Mordecai for his faithfulness for something he had done years and years ago. And so here's Haman. He's upset. He's had a bad day. He's went home to pout and talk to his wife and let her know everything that's happened. She's already said, look, if you can't overcome Mordecai, this Jew, then the Jewish people aren't going to be overcome. She's beginning to realize that something else is at play, that even Haman himself, probably at this point second in command over all of these provinces of this entire Persian kingdom, and yet he can't overcome these Jewish people. Something else is going on. Well, we know that God's at work and He's making good on His promises and taking care of His own. Well, he gets taken off to the feast. He probably wasn't ready to go, but in a hurry he leaves and goes to this feast that's been prepared. The king's going to be there, the queen's going to be there, and this is what it says in verse 1 of chapter 7. Read with me. So the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther. And on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we've been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss of the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he? And where is he? Who has dared to do this?" And Esther said, "A foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. Wow. All of this finally comes together. Like I said, if Haman thought he was having a bad day, boy, things surely just got worse. Now he's going to experience the wrath of the king. The king's already promised Esther, whatever you want, even to the half of my kingdom, you just let me know and you could have it. Surely he's doting on her. But the queen presents this, and remember, she's been very wise. She's been fasting. She's been praying. She's been very wise about presenting this and making her request. And the king's eager to know what it is, but he knows that she's been patient. He knows that she's following the rules and that she's trying to do what's right. And so surely he wants to truly honor whatever her request is. But it seems as if he's very surprised by the way that he reacts here, we'll see. He's very surprised at what's taken place. But remember, King Ahasuerus has made a habit of listening to advisors who have led him into decisions that later he would come to regret. And so here the queen is saying, my life's been put in danger. And so I'm asking that you change your mind about something, that you do something to intervene, that my life would be spared and the life of all my people, that all their lives would be spared as well. And as she explains it, she's very business oriented. She's talking about money. She's talking about how it's going to cause irreparable damage to the kingdom and to, their financial standings. This is going to be a great loss. And so she has explained it and makes, it easier for him to come to the realization that what appears to be a good decision that's going to rake in a great sum of money, when everything's finally calculated and everything's said and done and the books are closed, it's actually going to be irreparable loss. And I think the king is even more sensitive to this because of what had happened before. He's starting to wise up. He had listened to his advisors because of something the queen had done. She had been not willing to come in when she was called. But here he has a queen that's willing to do whatever, and she's serving well, and she's making a good example, and she's honoring him, and she's doing all these things, and he feels really blessed and really respected. And remember, he had went off to war and came back, and then he realized, oh yeah, I dethroned my queen. When I really needed her most, she's not here because of some decision that I made. Probably, I was upset, I was hasteful, I made this decision by listening to the wrong people. And so he's not going to be, so quick to make such a bad decision again because he's trying to learn from his mistakes, and he doesn't want to be without his queen whenever something happens. And so surely he loves and cherishes this queen the way that, that he's supposed to. And she's talking about money, but he's probably thinking about his honey. He doesn't want to lose her, and he didn't want to definitely suffer loss and doesn't want things to be turned over. But everything begins to unfold and everything begins to make sense. Haman's not done this so that the king could be profited. Haman's not, advised him to do this so that the king could be honored or so that his kingdom could experience better peace. These people haven't done anything wrong. Haman's done this and used his position of influence in order to, get the king to make a decision that's going to help Haman be happy. Haman's only serving himself. Haman thinks of himself as the best person, and so he's not ever doing anything to the benefit of the queen or to the benefit of the king or to the benefit of the kingdom. It's always what's going to be better for Haman. Oh, look at how I've been honored. Oh, look, who would the king honor more than me? It's got to be for me, so if it were me, I'd want this and this and this. And then everything begins to flip-flop on him because he's self-seeking, self-serving, self-loving. And so Queen Esther comes on behalf of herself and her people with this, wrong that's been done. And she talks about, if we've been sold into slavery and that was going to be of great benefit to the king, then I'd have kept my silence. But what she's saying is this is such a terrible decision and this is going to hurt the kingdom so badly that I had to speak up. And so she's very wise in how she presents her case before the king. And so let's look and see what his reaction is. The king arose in his wrath from the wine drinking and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. And the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house?" As the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Then Arbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "Moreover, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Hang him on that." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated. Notice not only how the king reacted, but notice how Haman reacted. He was immediately struck with fear. He was immediately begging for his life. This was something that he had done, and he sees that everything that he had prepared for those that stood in his way of his being glorified, his being honored, of his being exalted, he's seeing that everything has flipped over. It's all topsy-turvy, and now everything he had planned for their destruction is actually their exaltation, and everything for his exaltation is now his own destruction. Everything that formerly was going to satisfy him when he saw Mordecai hanging on the gallows, they're actually going to be for him. And the king, when he rose in wrath, it's very unusual for a king to just get up like that. And so Haman knew immediately, oh man, I'm in deep, deep trouble. I've got to beg for my life. And so probably what he did was he stood and began to beg, and then out of desperation just fell on his knees or fell at her side or whatever. But when the king came back in, he was enraged even more. By then, his decision had already been made, I'm sure. And so the scriptures tell us that his face was covered. That's because, when he's been condemned in that way, he's not even worthy to look upon the king anymore. So they cover his face, and surely Haman knows it's done. It's over with. There's nothing left for me. I've messed up. My life is now gone. And so it's interesting that one of the people that attends to the king or whatever, he was the one that mentioned, where there are those gallows, it's like everybody in the kingdom kind of has an idea of what's going on except for this ruler, except for this king. And an amazing thing is that these people all speak up and make things known at the right time. And it's just knowing when to speak up and how to speak up to right these wrongs and things like that. And so it's just amazing. I just want to point out to you again, you got to be careful who you take advice from. Make sure that you listen to the right people. If you want to be wise, then look back and see some of the mistakes you made and look and see if there are people in your life that you're following and you're listening to and they're really out for themselves. They're not out for your good or for the good of God's people. Instead, they're just trying to build themselves up, and you got to be wise to that. Otherwise, you're not going to know it, but the people that are on your side, they're hanging gallows to tear those people down one by one. Why? Because they're not on, they're not on the right people's side. They're just there for themselves. And so they'll be setting up people and doing things like that. So Esther has revealed this grand plot, and she's done it in a very fascinating and very, I'd say, in my opinion, it's come to the climax, a very climactic way that this has happened, but she's been wise all throughout, depending on God, I'm sure, to know when the right time was, praying and fasting. And I don't know, maybe God didn't speak to her and say, okay, do it this way. But just through her prayer, God came through at the right times. You see that? And, it's interesting because God's name's never mentioned here, but there's no doubt that God's people have been preserved. When there was nothing they could do for themselves, things worked out. I mean, whether it was a sleepless night for the king. Oh, but there's more for the story here. There's so much more that's going to happen when we'll see in our next episode. But what a climactic point that we see that the person who stands in opposition to God's people, that person is destroyed. That person is taken down. That person who had plotted against God's people finds that plot used against themselves. And the last part of this chapter tells us, then the wrath of the king abated. He was finally satisfied to know that, the Jews and that his queen Esther, who had been raised up and appointed for even such a time as that she was safe. After having suffered that loss and been through that, he was not willing to suffer that mistake again. And so he's finally calm. I mean, could you imagine how angry he would be to have probably one of what he thought was his best friends, one of the people that he thought was serving him so well, when all the while he was posing as a threat to his own queen. Haman probably had no idea that Esther was a Jew. But see, the thing is, when he was going to be racially, discriminate against the Jews just because of the actions of one person, or when he was going to just be so evil and so hateful to God's chosen people, really over nothing because a guy wouldn't bow down and worship to him, when he was going to be just so self-seeking, what did he think was going to happen? When people are self-seeking and they're out for their own, then of course they're going to trample on people and have no regard for other people at all. And so all that came back to bite Haman when he figured out, you know what? I'm no better than anybody else. And at any moment's notice, I could be cast down. And so Haman serves as a great example. Don't be self-seeking. Don't be self-serving. Go out and honor God's people and do your best to live a life that's not self-seeking, but that's self-sacrificing for others. There's more that's going to happen in episode 8. I promise you some neat things that are going to take place and how God continues to work through the life of Esther, continues to work through the life of Mordecai, and all these that are mentioned in our story in order to exalt His own people. So stay tuned, and I'll catch you guys next Tuesday with the next part of our devotional. God bless you.